Good morning, fifth grade. We're going to get started today with a quick write. We're going to review some information about the Great Depression so that then we can apply what we know later on in the week with our other texts about migrant workers. But first we need to know what was going on in the United States, and then we're going to learn how migrant workers responded to that. So our text today is called Hardships and Suffering During the Great Depression. I want you to think back. How did the Great Depression affect farmers? How did the Great Depression affect farmers? So write 2 to 3 sentences. Think back to, why farmers had a hard time and what did they do to solve their issue. So it was really hard for them to grow crops because there was a drought and there were dust storms. We also know that they had to move west to try to find more work. A lot of people lost their homes. Those are all things you can write down in your quick write. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready to get started. Our focus question for today is, how did the Great Depression affect the American people? And so we're not just looking at farmers today, but we want to think about how did it affect different groups of people in America. And there are 3 vocabulary words we really want to focus on today. The first one is rural. That is relating to the countryside. It's like the country, it's not a town. And so this is an example of a rural area. You see there aren't any shopping malls, there's not a lot of cars, there's not a lot of people. We see one house off in the distance. So we know in rural areas, people are spread farther apart than they would be in cities. Our next vocabulary word is shanty town. And that's an area outside of town that has a large number of crude dwellings. And so a crude dwelling is like a makeshift house, something you can make out of, spare parts lying around. All right, so this is an example of a shanty town. And then the last word is charitable, and that's when you give assistance to someone that needs it. All right, so turn in your text to the map, okay? And so this is the beginning of your text, and we want to keep going until we get to the map. And we're just going to focus on this area right here. Our first question asks us, what is the author trying to communicate in this map? Okay, so first we would go to the title, right? That gives us a big clue about what the author is trying to do. So it says our title right here is The Dust Bowl, 1933 to 1936. If you remember our text, Okie Go Home, you should really be familiar with the Dust Bowl. That is like this area right here would be our Dust Bowl, the middle of the United States, also known as the Midwest. All right, that's our Dust Bowl. Okay, and then if you look over here, this dark part right here, that is the heart of the Dust Bowl. That's where it was the worst. And then the lighter part, that is more damage that the Dust Bowl created. Okay, but this dotted line, everything in here, these people also experienced dust storms. Anyone inside this dotted line, they also experienced dust storms. And then the author gives us information about different kinds of cities and how those people were affected by dust storms. And so when we're thinking, what's the author trying to communicate in this map? The author is giving us information about who was affected by dust storms and where they lived. Write that down for 1A. The author is giving us information about who was affected by the Dust Bowl and where they lived. Who was affected and where they lived. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 1B. It says, what's the author's purpose for the map? We know the author's purpose is as easy as pie. The author's either going to persuade us, inform us, or entertain us. And so we know the purpose of this map is to inform us about the Dust Bowl and how it affected people in the United States. The author's purpose, silently write this down for 1B, is to inform the reader about how the Dust Bowl affected people in the United States. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for number 2. Number 2 asks us, according to the details in the map, how was the depression in cities similar to the depression in rural areas? Okay, so that means we're going to have to read these text bubbles and figure out which ones are cities and which ones are rural areas. Okay, so Nebraska, that's a state, but it's a very rural state. So put an R outside Nebraska. Okay, then go down here. Beaver, Oklahoma. Oklahoma is also a rural state, so put an R out beside it. Go down here to Tucumcari, New Mexico. That's also a rural area, put an R. All right, over here, New York City. That's a city, put a C. Go up here, Boston. That's another city, put a C. And then Chicago, that's another city, put a C. So we want to know, how are these details similar in the cities and in the rural areas? So we're picking out what is the same about them. How were they both affected by the Dust Bowl? How were they similarly affected? So let's read our bubbles for cities. I'm up here at Chicago. Crowds at Chicago Exposition World's Fair are caught in a 50-mile-per-hour gale of dust. All right. Boston. Midwestern dust is found on airplanes landing in Boston. It collected on the planes at altitudes of 20,000 feet. Wow. So altitude is how high up you are in the air. And so even from 20,000 feet up in the air, the Boston planes had dust on them from the dust storms. So that means these storms are thousands of miles high. That's pretty scary. Okay, let's keep going to New York. Dust lowers humidity from normal 57% to 34%. Dust is reported on ships 500 miles out to sea. Wow, so not only is it on land, but it's also, the dust storms are also traveling into the ocean. Wow, so we know these storms are, they're strong, they're 50 miles an hour, they're big, they're several thousand feet high, and we know they can travel really far. Okay, so let's see if that's something people also experienced in the rural areas. Let's go to Nebraska. Over 2 years, federal workers helped soil conservation by planting 360,000 trees and completing 62 dams, 517 ponds, and 500 acres of terracing. All right, so they had to do things to the land to try to repair the land from the dust storms. Let's keep going. Beaver, Oklahoma. Grain elevator operators estimate that 20% of wheat crop has been blown away by dust storms. All right, so the dust storms are so strong that it's blowing away the plants. And in Tucumcari, New Mexico, Clouds of dust blown by 50-mile-per-hour winds cause complete darkness. All right, so what facts about the dust storms in the rural areas and the dust storms in the cities are similar? Well, we know that the dust storms are really strong. Dust storms in the cities and in rural areas were at least 50 miles per hour. So that's one thing you can write down for number 2. Dust storms in cities and rural areas were at least 50 miles per hour. And then another thing is, it's not explicit, but we know that the dust storms caused a lot of damage. They caused damage in the cities as well as in the rural areas. So write that down for number 2. Dust storms also cause damage in cities and rural areas. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for just number 3. There shouldn't be an A there. Also, this should say cities instead of rural areas, so you can cross that out. All right, 3 says, according to the details in the map, how is depression in cities different from depression in rural areas? Well, we can go back. We know that in Nebraska, they began repairing the land that was affected by the dust storms, and that's not something that we know that they did in the cities based on the information in this map. So in the rural areas, they began preparing the land, but in the cities, we don't have evidence that they repaired the land. All right. And then number 4 says, describe the suffering of Latinos and African Americans during the Great Depression. How does the suffering of these group of people compare to the suffering of white Americans? So that is something, I was looking down to see if we are going to answer it in the lesson. That's something, if you're reading, when we go back in our lesson for today, that we'll definitely talk about. You can go back up to the second page and read the bottom half of the second page, starting at conditions for African Americans and Latinos, to get your answer. And that's in just these 2 paragraphs. And then when you're finished with that, you can go ahead and write your paragraph. How did the Great Depression affect the American people? And you can use the details from the map to talk about how it affected people in cities and how it affected people in rural areas.